The moment the sheriff handed me a court summons, flanked by two HOA board members filming from the street, I knew this wasn't just about a painted porch anymore. They had forged documents, twisted laws, and now they were trying to shut down my repairs using emergency powers they illegally claimed. What they didn't know was that I had evidence, witnesses, and a plan to take down their entire scheme, starting in court. The fifth knock on my door in 3 days came just as I'd finished brushing the last stroke of teal blue paint across the edge of my front porch. I knew who it would be before I even opened the door. The only question was whether it would be the sheriff again, or the queen of the homeowners association herself. When I opened the door, I was met with the crisp silhouette of Constance Ellerman, standing ramrod straight on the gravel walkway like she owned not just the HOA, but the entire lake. She wore khakis that hadn't seen a wrinkle since the Reagan administration, and a blouse so tightly tucked it looked vacuum-sealed. "Mr. Barnes," she said with a smile so thin it could cut drywall, "we need to have a word." I stepped out onto the newly painted porch and leaned against the railing, making sure my dusty paintbrush was still visible. "Is it about the color?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes, it is," she snapped. "This shade, this garish blue, is not in compliance with our community's approved color palette. You were required to submit a request to the Architectural Review Committee prior to altering your home's exterior appearance." "That would make sense," I said slowly, "if my home were actually part of your HOA. But it's not." Her nostrils flared just slightly. I held up the laminated parcel map I'd been carrying around in my back pocket ever since she first stopped by. "You see that line right there? The HOA boundary ends well before my driveway." She didn't look. "Be that as it may," she said, recovering quickly, "we expect all residents of Willow Lake to uphold a certain visual standard. That color undermines the aesthetic cohesion we've worked hard to maintain." I smiled. "It's teal. Not a meth lab." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over, Mr. Barnes." She turned on her heel and marched down the driveway, already dialing someone on her phone. Probably her attorney. Or the sheriff. Or God. It had been less than a week since I moved to Willow Lake. After 2 years of remote work and pandemic isolation, I'd sold my townhouse in Minneapolis and bought this old cabin sight unseen. The listing promised peace, fiber internet, and a view of the lake. What it didn't mention was the woman who patrolled the shoreline like a border guard. For the first few days, I genuinely thought Constance's warnings were a bluff. My property was clearly excluded from the HOA, something both my real estate agent and attorney had verified. But the next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my mailbox. Unauthorized color alteration. Followed the next day by another, improper vehicle positioning. And another, non-standard porch furniture, referencing my second-hand wicker chair, which, for the record, had a throw pillow. Then came the police. Sheriff's Deputy Brooks showed up on Friday, a full head taller than Constance but about half as confident. "We got a call," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "about unauthorized construction." "Painting my porch?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just doing my job." I showed him the same parcel map, the same legal documents. He looked them over, nodded slowly, and sighed. "Looks like you're in the clear. But between us, Constance isn't going to stop. Just be careful." That night, I met my next-door neighbor, Joyce Ramirez, while I was out walking by the dock. She was in her 30s, graphic designer, the kind of person who wore sarcastic t-shirts and always had paint smudged on her fingers. "I see you've met Constance," she said, handing me a beer. "She give you the speech about aesthetic standards yet?" I nodded. 3 times, plus printed handouts. Joyce rolled her eyes. "She tried to fine me once for having wind chimes. Said they were audibly aggressive. I'm not even in the HOA." "Neither am I said. "But that doesn't seem to matter to her." "It doesn't," she said. "There used to be 6 cabins that weren't part of the HOA. Now there's only 5. She pushed the last owner out, some guy named Jenkins. Wouldn't let up until he sold. The next day, I found a hand-delivered letter from the HOA's legal representative, Marvin Ellis. It accused me of violating community visual standards and threatened further action. I called Ron Delaney, an old retired judge who lived 3 cabins down and had introduced himself earlier that week with a thermos of coffee and a handshake like sandpaper. "You've got to document everything," he said when I told him about the notices and the sheriff visits. She did the same thing to my buddy Frank. Buried him in fake violations. He eventually caved. "But my property isn't in the HOA," I said. "That's the thing," Ron replied. "She knows that. But she wants all lakefront cabins under her control. Rumor is, there's a developer sniffing around, offering cash to HOA members who help bring everything under one umbrella." "You're serious?" "Granite Bay Ventures," he said. "Big money. They want a resort. But they need all the land, especially the north side, where you and I are. That blue porch? It's not just paint. It's a line in the sand." I spent the weekend pulling every document I could find about the Willow Lake HOA, public records, and corporation papers, community standards. I discovered the Wisconsin Area Freedom Act, a 1983 statute that clearly stated no HOA may enforce regulations on properties outside its legally designated boundaries. Case closed. Or so I thought. Because on Monday morning, I woke up to find my mailbox ripped off its post and dumped in the lake. On Tuesday, my business website was flooded with fake 1-star reviews. On Wednesday, my internet went out, mysteriously, even though no other homes nearby had issues. That evening, Deputy Brooks showed up again. "Noise complaint," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "They said you were operating power tools past curfew." I was fixing a chair. "They're going to keep filing reports," he warned. "They're trying to break you down. You need to get ahead of this." "I am," I said. "I've got everything saved. Every letter. Every notice. Every incident." "Good," he said. "You'll need it." As he left, I stood on my porch, looked out over the water, and remembered a weekend I spent at this very lake when I was 11. My mom had taken me fishing here. I caught a bluegill off a rickety dock and thought it was the greatest moment of my life. That was the first time I felt peace. Now, standing on that same shoreline, watching storm clouds roll in, I realized something. I wasn't just here for a work-from-home paradise. I was here to protect that feeling, for me, and maybe for everyone else stuck under the HOA's thumb. I'd always been a quiet guy. But something about this place, this battle, this woman who thought she could rule with bylaws and threats, it lit something in me. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd paint my porch beige and disappear. But they didn't know me. Not yet. Not the guy who used to debug code for 20 hours straight. Not the guy who grew up watching his mom fight City Hall over a school zoning issue and win. They wanted a fight. Well, now they had one. By the time I poured my second cup of coffee that morning, I had already cataloged 5 more petty incidents from the past week: a tipped-over compost bin, a citation taped to my car window for non-compliant vehicle aesthetics, and a mysterious, strongly worded letter warning me that continued disregard for community integrity may result in escalated measures. The letter was unsigned, of course, but the font matched Constance's HOA violation templates down to the serif. I wasn't surprised. Ever since the confrontation on my teal-blue porch, Constance Ellerman had doubled down. The police visits were getting more frequent, the notices more absurd, and the surveillance? Relentless. I'd counted at least 3 different HOA board members snapping photos of my property at odd hours. Even Joyce had started pulling back, clearly afraid of being fined for talking to me in public. The HOA wasn't just angry, I had become their obsession. Which meant they were hiding something big. That theory turned into certainty the day I received a letter from an attorney named Marvin Ellis, acting on behalf of the HOA. Unlike the previous notices, this one was aggressive in tone and legal in structure. It claimed that, according to updated HOA boundaries, my property now fell under their jurisdiction, and that by painting my porch and performing recent unauthorized landscaping, I had violated community bylaws. Attached was a map. It was new. It was also a complete lie. The boundary line had shifted several yards, now neatly curling around my land like a noose. I stared at it for a long time, then dug up the original parcel map filed with the county in 1995. The line was nowhere near my property. This was fabricated. They had falsified legal documents. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about a porch. This was about money. I went to see Ron Delaney, the retired judge who'd helped me early on. He studied the documents and let out a slow whistle. They're trying to rewrite jurisdiction after the fact, he muttered. Which means either they're desperate or there's a major incentive on the table. That incentive became painfully clear 2 days later when I found it, tucked into a manila folder at the county records office, mistakenly left among the Planning Commission files. A confidential proposal from Granite Bay Ventures, a corporate developer with a history of converting lakeside communities into high-end resorts. The plan outlined a $200 million project for Willow Lake luxury spa and residences. They wanted to buy up the entire lakefront, demolish existing structures, and build a gated resort community with a golf course, 3 restaurants, and a 200-room hotel. There was a specific clause: all existing properties must fall within the HOA structure to ensure streamlined acquisition and aesthetic compliance. Then came the kicker, a line item marked board incentive compensation. Every HOA board member would receive $25,000 for facilitating the acquisition of lakefront properties. The HOA president? $50,000. That explained Constance's crusade. My porch wasn't an eyesore, it was an obstacle to her payout. I dug deeper and found that 3 other cabins had sold in the past year, all after sustained harassment campaigns. And each for less than market value. This was extortion in broad daylight, disguised as community enforcement. The next twist came through an unexpected source. One evening, as I was sorting through scanned documents at my kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. A woman's voice whispered, "Elliot, it's Patricia Hale. I'm the HOA treasurer. I can't talk long." "Okay," I said carefully. "Why are you calling me?" "Because I can't do this anymore." I was in the room when Constance and Marvin edited the boundary maps. They said it was a technical update and submitted it with the storm recovery paperwork. But it was fraud. And they're planning to use it to get emergency powers from the county. Wait, emergency powers? They're claiming the storm damage requires unified recovery control. That gives the HOA temporary authority over all properties, even the ones outside the original boundary. They'll shut down your repairs. Then file injunctions. It's already in motion. Would you testify to this? There was a pause. Yes. I'm scared. But yes. I thanked her and ended the call, then immediately began backing up everything I had: the fake map, the development proposal, the Freedom Act, and now Patricia's verbal confirmation of document tampering. The next day, I was served court papers, an emergency injunction demanding I stop all construction on my cabin due to alleged violations of post-storm recovery ordinances. Marvin Ellis had filed the motion, citing the altered map as proof of HOA jurisdiction. It was exactly the ambush Patricia had warned me about. But I was ready. I filed a counterclaim that afternoon, representing myself. I included certified boundary maps, a notarized copy of the Wisconsin Area Freedom Act, photographs of the original boundary markers, and a copy of the Granite Bay proposal. I even had a forensic handwriting expert analyze the forged consent form they'd used to claim I had agreed to HOA rules. His conclusion was clear: the signature wasn't mine. The court date was set for the following week. Word spread fast. Joyce texted to say several neighbors had approached her privately, people who had once supported Constance, now asking questions. One couple, Dr. Nathaniel Reed and his wife Leah, invited me over to talk. We turned down her offer last year, Nathaniel told me. She promised the HOA would take care of us if we sold quietly. When we refused, we got daily citations for 6 months. Even for things like wind direction on our flagpole. They're doing the same thing to me, I said. But now I've got proof. They both looked relieved. Whatever you need, Leah said. We'll testify. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the county courthouse with a binder full of evidence and a heart beating like a drumline. Constance was already seated at the front of the courtroom, flanked by Marvin Ellis and another attorney in a suit that probably cost more than my car. I was alone. But I wasn't afraid. Judge Miranda Kelly was presiding, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for fairness and a sharp tongue. She called the case and asked both sides to present their arguments. Marvin began, smugly laying out their case with the new boundary map and legal jargon about functional community integration. When it was my turn, I stood, took a breath, and began dismantling their narrative piece by piece. I presented the original 1995 boundary map. I cited the Freedom Act's explicit prohibition on regulating non-member properties. I presented the handwriting analysis on the forged consent form. Then I introduced Patricia Hale. She stepped up, voice trembling at first, but steady as she told the court how Constance and Marvin had knowingly altered legal documents and lied to county officials to gain emergency jurisdiction. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Constance sat frozen, lips pressed so tight they turned white. Your Honor, I concluded, this is not about community harmony. This is about greed. A corporate resort is dangling money in front of this board, and they are breaking laws to get their payday. Judge Kelly turned to Constance. Do you deny these allegations? They're twisting everything, she snapped. We're protecting our neighborhood. The judge wasn't moved. By forging signatures? By altering public maps? By filing frivolous injunctions? She glanced at Marvin. Mr. Ellis, you are being referred to the Wisconsin Bar for ethics review. As for this emergency injunction, it is denied. Mr. Barnes' property is not under your jurisdiction. She banged the gavel. Case closed. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because buried in the county archives, I had found something else, something no one else seemed to know. A designation on a faded 1971 planning document. 3 simple words, Historic Preservation District. And it was going to blow this whole thing wide open. 3 simple words, Historic Preservation District, had the power to stop a multi-million-dollar development in its tracks. I'd found them scrawled in faded ink on a 1971 planning document buried deep in the county archives, almost lost to time, almost ignored by history. But now, those words had become my weapon. The ink may have been faded, but its legal power hadn't dulled a bit. As I walked out of the courthouse after winning my counterclaim against the HOA, I didn't feel victorious, I felt hungry. Hungry to finish what I'd started. Because while Judge Kelly had thrown out their injunction, referred Marvin to the bar, and slammed the brakes on Constance's fake jurisdiction, the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The resort project still loomed like a shadow over Willow Lake, and if someone didn't drag its secrets into the sunlight, it would rise again, meaner, more hidden, more dangerous. I took the preservation document straight to the county planning office. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Jeff with glasses thick enough to see the moon, studied it, cross-referenced it, and then went very still. This designation is still active, he said slowly. Willow Lake is listed under the Wisconsin Historic Preservation Registry. That means any development over 5,000 square feet requires review and approval by the State Historic Board. I leaned forward. So a 200-room resort? Illegal. Completely. They'd need years of environmental and historical clearance, public hearings, permits, none of which they've applied for. He looked up, brows raised. You may have just nuked Granite Bay's entire project. That same afternoon, I delivered copies of the document to Judge Kelly's clerk, the county commissioner's office, and, most satisfyingly, the local paper, whose reporter had been quietly sitting in the back of the courtroom during my hearing. By the next morning, the headline read, "Preservation Law Could Derail Willow Lake Resort Deal, Local Cabin Owner Uncovers Key Document." The effect was immediate. Granite Bay Ventures released a vague statement about respecting the integrity of the process, and the HOA board went into full panic mode. That weekend, several residents received emails from Constance encouraging unity during a time of misinformation. But the tide had already turned. Patricia Hale, the treasurer who testified on my behalf, resigned the next day, releasing a public letter condemning the board's actions and confirming that the boundary maps had been altered without member consent. At the next HOA meeting, attended by nearly every resident and more than a few curious journalists, the air was electric. Joyce Ramirez stood up, holding a petition signed by over 50% of HOA members, calling for a vote of no confidence in Constance Ellerman. It passed in minutes. The room broke into applause, not just polite clapping, but the kind of genuine, cathartic cheer that only comes after years of silent frustration. Constance didn't speak. She stood slowly, gathered her leather binder, and walked out without a word. Marvin Ellis, who had remained conspicuously absent since the court ruling, sent in his resignation 2 days later. A county investigator confirmed they were looking into the falsified documents, and the Wisconsin Bar Association opened a formal inquiry into Marvin's conduct. For the first time since I'd moved in, Willow Lake was quiet again, but this time, the quiet felt clean. Honest. Hopeful. That week, a special election was held to appoint a new HOA president. Joyce ran unopposed and was elected with overwhelming support. Her first act? Establishing an independent review committee to investigate every HOA violation issued in the past 2 years. Her second? Announcing the formation of the Willow Lake Preservation Alliance, a new organization composed of HOA and non-HOA residents alike, united by a mission to protect the natural beauty, historic value, and neighborly spirit of our lake community. I joined immediately. So did Ron Delaney. So did Dr. Reed and his wife. So did a dozen others who'd once felt voiceless. For the first time, the lake didn't feel like a battlefield, it felt like home. I spent the next month restoring my cabin's roof with reclaimed cedar shingles, using the original 1970s design permitted under the preservation guidelines. I repainted the porch railings, carefully preserving the bold teal that had started the war, but adding natural wood accents that blended beautifully with the lakeside palette. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about honoring what the place was always meant to be. One warm afternoon in late June, I hosted a community barbecue at my place. People brought food, lawn chairs, dogs, guitars. Kids played near the dock. Ron made his famous lemon iced tea and told stories about the lake's early days, back when cabins were heated by wood stoves and everyone knew each other's names. Even some former supporters of Constance came, quietly, humbly, and were welcomed without judgment. That night, under the string lights I'd hung from the porch rafters, Joyce clinked her glass against mine. "You know," she said, "you could have just painted the porch beige and avoided all of this." I grinned. "And miss out on the fun?" She laughed, shaking her head. "You're dangerous with a paintbrush, Elliot Barnes." Later that week, I published a free digital guide titled Know Your Rights, a homeowner's guide to HOA overreach and legal protections in Wisconsin. I uploaded it to community forums, shared it with neighborhood groups, and printed out copies to place in the library and post office. Within a month, I started getting emails from other people around the state, people facing intimidation, confusion, legal threats from overreaching associations. I responded to everyone. Helped where I could. Pointed them toward the law. I even spoke at a town hall in a neighboring county. I never intended to become an advocate, but sometimes the world picks your cause for you. And this one mattered. Because what happened at Willow Lake wasn't unique. It was part of a larger pattern, one where power hides behind paperwork, and ordinary people are told to sit down, follow the rules, and not ask questions. But if there's one thing I've learned from this fight, it's that the rules only work when they're honest. And the moment they're used to silence people, they stop being rules, they become weapons. And weapons can be taken away. One evening, as the fireflies began blinking above the lake, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, and watched the water catch the fading light. A truck rolled slowly past on the road above the tree lane, an old rusted pickup, unfamiliar. Inside, a woman sat behind the wheel, her silver hair pulled tightly back, her face pale and unreadable. Constance. Her eyes locked with mine for a brief moment. No longer defiant. No longer in command. Just tired. I didn't wave. But I didn't feel anger either. Just the weight of everything we'd gone through. The consequences had landed. The truth had won. And that was enough. I went back inside and placed a copy of the guide in a padded envelope, wrote her name on it, and set it by the mailbox. Everyone deserves to understand their rights. As I settled back into the rhythm of daily life, work calls, garden chores, coffee on the dock, I found peace again. The kind I'd come to Willow Lake searching for. And I finally understood what my mother meant when she used to say, the only thing stronger than a bully is a person who refuses to be quiet. I wasn't quiet. And I wasn't alone. And because of that, a community was rebuilt, not with bylaws or fines, but with courage, integrity, and a bold teal porch that dared to be different. In a world where quiet communities can be overtaken by loud power plays, Elliot Barnes's journey reminds us of a powerful truth. Knowing your rights and standing your ground isn't just about protecting property. It's about protecting your dignity, your voice, and your peace of mind. What began as a simple desire to repaint a porch became a lesson in resilience, legality, and community leadership. Elliot didn't have millions, political power, or an army of lawyers. But what he did have was courage, clarity, and the willingness to research, document, and speak up. He showed us that bullies often thrive on silence, and when met with truth and persistence, their power crumbles quickly. This story also sheds light on the hidden side of some HOAs. While many associations serve their purpose with fairness and cooperation, others can become tools for greed and control. If you're a homeowner, especially in the U.S., it's essential to read your documents, know your boundaries, and question overreach. The law often offers more protection than you realize, but you have to be willing to seek it out and use it. Just as importantly, this story is a call to community unity. When neighbors stop being afraid, when they talk, organize, and share truth, they take back power. Joyce, Ron, Patricia, and even those who once stayed silent all became part of a bigger movement, one that turned a toxic HOA into a collaborative preservation alliance. The healing began when people stopped complying with fear and started building with integrity. So, to anyone listening who has ever felt cornered by authority, pressured by unfair systems, or silenced by fear, let this be your reminder: you are not alone. Stand up. Speak out. Document everything. Ask questions. And never underestimate what one bold voice can do in a small town. On behalf of the U.S. Daily Story Channel, thank you so much for listening to today's story. Your time, your attention, and your shared sense of justice are what keep this community growing. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of something you've gone through, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear your experience. And remember, in every neighborhood, on every quiet street, someone might be fighting a silent battle for what's right. Be that neighbor who stands with them. Be the person who listens, supports, and speaks truth when others stay silent. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and never be afraid to paint your porch blue.